the eyes that won't leave me alone. They're not the wide, cartoonish ovals you remember from Saturday mornings. These are wet, glassy, and far too human, staring straight through the screen as if they've been watching me for years. The pupils tremble just slightly, like they're straining to focus on something behind me. His grin, if you can even call it that, stretches far past where the corners of his mouth should end. Skin pulled taut in a way no animator's hand could have. Drawn by accident. The colors are wrong. Not just faded, but sickly, like the whole frame has been dipped in nicotine and seawater. The yellow of his skin is jaundiced, almost bruised, and the whites of his eyes aren't white at all. They're a pale, cloudy gray, threaded with veins that pulse in time with the faint hiss of static. That sound. It's not the clean, empty hiss of a blank tape. It's wet. There's a faint gurgle. Beneath it, like bubbles rising through thick water. Every few seconds, the static stutters, and I swear I hear something else in the gaps. A breath. A whisper. My name. His head tilts just slightly, as if he's reacting to me noticing. The background behind him is frozen too, but it's wrong in ways I can't fully process. The outlines of the Krusty Krab are warped, the grill in the kitchen sagging like it's melting, the colors bleeding into each other, like oil on water. I can't tell if the frame is paused or if he's holding perfectly still. The longer I stare, the more I'm convinced it's the latter. There's a tension in his posture, a coiled readiness, like he's waiting for me to blink first. And here's the worst part. No, not the worst part. Not yet. This image, this grotesque parody of a childhood icon, is only the doorway. What came after? I wish I could scrub it from my mind, but it's etched there, burned in like the afterimage of staring at the sun. I didn't find this frame by accident. I went looking for it. I never should have pressed play. I've always had a soft spot for the past. Not in a listen to vinyl and wear suspenders kind of way, but in the sense that I can't walk past a dusty thrift store without wondering what forgotten treasures might be hiding inside. Some people collect stamps, others collect sneakers. Me? I collect memories, or at least the physical shells of them. VHS tapes, scratched DVDs, promotional toys from fast food kids' meals. The kind of junk most people toss without a second thought. It started harmlessly enough. A few years back, I found an old Rugrats tape at a flea market for 50 cents. The cover was sun-faded, the plastic case cracked, but when I popped it into my VCR, it played perfectly. For 22 minutes, I was 8 years old again, sprawled in the carpet with a bowl of cereal, the world outside my living room irrelevant. That feeling, that sudden, dizzying rush of nostalgia was addictive. Soon I was hunting for more. Garage sales, pawn shops, online auctions. I wasn't picky about the shows as long as they were from that golden window of my childhood. Late 90s to early 2000s. Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, even the occasional Disney Channel oddity. Told myself it was a hobby, something to keep me busy after work. My friends called it hoarding with better branding. But somewhere along the way, my tastes shifted. I stumbled across a forum thread about lost episodes, unaired cuts of familiar shows, rumored to be too disturbing, too strange, or too cursed for public release. Most of the stories were obvious fakes, the kind of creepypasta you read at 2 a.m. for a cheap thrill. Still, I couldn't help but be intrigued. The idea that there might be versions of these shows I'd grown up with, darker, stranger versions, hidden away from the world, it was irresistible. I started searching for them. Not just the famous ones everyone talks about, but the obscure, barely whispered rumors. A Powerpuff Girls short that supposedly aired only once at 3 a.m. A banned Pokemon episode that made kids sick. A Courage the Cowardly Dog pilot no one could prove existed. Most leads went nowhere, but every so often I'd find something off. Tape mislabeled, a file with a strange checksum, a seller who refused to answer questions. It became a game, a hunt, and like any good hunter, I learned to recognize the signs, the little red flags that told me I was close to something rare. I didn't know it yet, but one of those finds was about to change everything. Then I saw the listing. It was sometime after midnight when I found it, that dangerous hour when your brain is too tired to be cautious, but too wired to stop scrolling. I was deep in the weeds of an online auction site I'd never used before, the kind of place where the categories are vague and the listings feel like they've been sitting there for years, untouched. Buried between a stack of old workout tapes and a bootleg copy of Shrek 2 was a thumbnail that stopped me cold. The cover was just a plain black VHS sleeve, no artwork, no label, except for a strip of masking tape across the spine. On it, in faded red marker, were the words, "If you're a SpongeBob fan, SB-129 is a real episode, the one where Squidward gets frozen and travels through time." But uncut? That was new. I'd never heard of an alternate version, and I'd been down enough lost media rabbit holes to think I'd seen it. Curiosity prickled at the back of my neck. I clicked the listing. The description was barely 2 sentences long. Original broadcast master. Not for children. Do not watch past 9 minutes. Clung to my hands even after I set the box down. I tore it open on the kitchen counter. Inside, there was no bubble wrap, no packing peanuts. Just a bundle wrapped in what looked like a faded SpongeBob bedsheet. The kind you'd find in a kid's bedroom circa 2003. Bright yellows and blues now dulled to the color of old paper. The fabric was damp in places, and when I unfolded it, grains of sand spilled out onto the counter. That's when I saw the writing. Thick black marker, scrawled across one corner of the sheet. In jagged, uneven strokes. The letters weren't in English. In fact, they weren't in any alphabet I recognized, looping, curling shapes that seemed to shift if I stared too long. For a moment, I thought they might be some kind of stylized SpongeBob font, but the longer I looked, the more wrong they felt. Like they weren't meant to be read so much as spoken. Looked, the more wrong they felt. Like they weren't meant to be read so much as spoken. I shook it off and unwrapped the bundle completely. The tape inside was unmarked except for the same strip of masking tape I'd seen in the listing. The faded red ink spelling out the plastic casing was scratched, one corner chipped, and when I tilted it, I could hear something faint rattling inside, like a loose screw, or maybe a piece of film. I should have stopped there. I should have at least thought about the fact that I was holding something that smelled like it had been dredged from the ocean, wrapped in a child's bedsheet covered in symbols I couldn't place. But instead, I felt that same rush I always did. When I found something rare, that mix of excitement and dread, the sense that I was about to see something I wasn't supposed to. I set up my old VCR. Slid into the VCR with a reluctant click, like it didn't want to be there. I pressed play, half expecting nothing but static, but instead, the familiar Nickelodeon splash screen flickered to life. For a moment, I felt that same warm rush I always did, the comfort of a childhood Saturday morning. But something was off. The colors were muted, like the saturation had been dialed down just enough to make everything look tired. SpongeBob's pineapple wasn't the bright, cartoon orange I remembered. It was a dull, almost rusted shade. The sky, usually a cheerful turquoise, had a faint greenish tint, like seawater left in a dirty tank. The background music was there, but slower. Not dramatically, just enough that the jaunty ukulele strums felt heavy, dragging behind the visuals. It was the kind of change you might not notice right away, but once you did, you couldn't unhear it. SpongeBob appeared, bouncing into frame with his usual enthusiasm, but his laugh, that high-pitched, rapid-fire cackle burned into pop culture, was wrong. It was deeper, slower, and each ha seemed to echo faintly, as if it had been recorded in a large, empty room. Told myself it was just tape degradation, but the sound made the hairs on my arms stand up. The episode itself seemed to follow the plot of SB-129 at first. Squidward oversleeps, gets locked in the freezer, wakes up in the future. But the pacing was strange. Shots lingered too long, especially on characters' faces. Squidward's eyes would hold on SpongeBob a beat too long before speaking, and SpongeBob's smile, normally wide and goofy, seemed fixed, like it was painted on. I leaned forward, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the tape was a rough cut, an early edit before the final polish. But then I noticed something else. The background characters weren't moving. Not frozen exactly, just still, like they were. The audio had a faint hiss under it, the same wet static I'd heard when I first saw that freeze frame. Every so often it would stutter, and I thought I heard something layered beneath the music. A whisper, maybe, too faint to make out, that I kept watching, telling myself I'd stop if it got too weird. But I didn't. At 8:57, the screen went black. No fade out, no transition. Just a sudden, suffocating darkness. The audio cut too, leaving only that wet, bubbling static. I sat there, remote in hand, waiting for the picture to return. And then it began. The black screen lingered for a few seconds too long, just enough for me to start wondering if the tape had broken. Then, without warning, the image snapped back, but it wasn't the bikini bottom I knew. The colors were still bright, almost aggressively so, but they didn't feel cheerful anymore. The sky was a blistering, unnatural blue, the kind that made my eyes ache. The sand was a jaundiced yellow, littered with debris, broken signs, splintered wood, what looked like the twisted remains of jellyfish nets. Buildings leaned at impossible angles, their outlines warping and bending as if they were melting into the ocean floor. The camera panned slowly through the streets. There were no background fish bustling about, no cheery chatter. Instead, the few figures that moved did so in jerks and spasms, their bodies contorting in ways that made my stomach turn. A fish with a missing eye shuffled past the screen, its mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Another sat slumped against a wall, its skin peeling away in strips that floated upward like seaweed. Then I saw he was SpongeBob, standing in the middle of the street, perfectly still, his arms hanging limply at his sides. His smile was there, wide and fixed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes, too large, too wet, followed the camera as it moved, even when his head didn't. Behind him, the Krusty Krab was in ruins. The sign dangled by a single chain, swinging slowly, and the windows were black, as if the inside had been burned out. The scene cut abruptly to the interior. Mr. Krabs was hunched over the register, but his claws were gone, replaced by jagged stumps. He was muttering something under his breath, the words garbled and low, like they'd been recorded underwater. Every so often he would slam his stumps against the counter, leaving dark smears that drifted upward in the water. In the kitchen, Squidward stood over the grill, but there was no food, just a blackened, bubbling mass that hissed and popped. His eyes were bloodshot, his mouth twisted into a grimace. He didn't look up when SpongeBob entered, but the moment SpongeBob stepped into frame, the audio dropped to silence. SpongeBob turned to face the camera. At first, I thought it was just a creepy fourth wall break, the kind you sometimes see in fan edits. But then his lips moved, slowly, deliberately, and I heard it. My name. Not viewer. Not you. My actual name. It wasn't shouted or whispered. It was spoken plainly, like he was greeting an old friend. The sound of it made my chest tighten. I froze, my finger hovering over the stop button. But I couldn't look away. The camera zoomed in on his face. The colors around him began to bleed, the bright yellows and blues running together into a sickly green. His smile widened, stretching far past what should have been possible, the corners of his mouth splitting slightly. Tiny bubbles escaped from between his teeth, drifting upward and popping against the lens. Behind him, the world seemed to decay faster. The walls of the Krusty Krab sagged inward, the floorboards curling like dead leaves. The other characters, Mr. Krabs, Squidward, even a few background fish, turned toward the camera in unison, their eyes glassy and unblinking. SpongeBob leaned closer until his face filled the frame. The static hiss returned, louder now, layered with that faint, bubbling gurgle. His pupils dilated, swallowing the whites of his eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw my own reflection in them, distorted, rippling, like I was underwater. Then he spoke again. This time, it wasn't my name. It was something else, something in that same looping, curling script I'd seen on the bedsheet. The sound of it made my skin crawl like it was vibrating inside my bones. I slammed the pause button. The image froze, SpongeBob's face, inches from the lens, mouth open mid-syllable. I sat there, breathing hard, the remote clutched in my hand, trying to convince myself I hadn't really heard what I thought I did. But deep down, I knew I had. That night, I left the tape in the VCR and went to bed, telling myself I'd process what I'd seen in the morning. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that frozen frame, SpongeBob's face inches from mine, mouth open mid-syllable at some point. I must have drifted off, because I woke gasping, my sheets tangled around me like seaweed. My dream had been vivid, suffocating. I was underwater, the light above me fading, my lungs burning. Something was holding me down, its grip cold and unyielding. Just before I woke, I heard it. That same bubbling static from the tape, and underneath it, laugh, slow, drawn out, familiar. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered. The air in my apartment felt heavy, damp, like the humidity before a storm. When I padded into the living room, the TV was on, just static, no sound. The VCR's power light glowed faintly, even though I was sure I'd turned it off. That was the first glitch. Over the next 2 days, my electronics started acting strange. My phone would freeze, the screen flickering with faint yellow and blue bands before returning to normal. My laptop speakers hissed softly when no audio was playing, and once, just for a second, I thought I heard my name in the noise. Then came the laughter. It was faint at first, so quiet I thought it was coming from outside, but it followed me from room to room, always just at the edge of hearing. Sometimes it was high-pitched, almost like the real SpongeBob laugh, but slowed down until it sounded wrong. Other times it was low and wet, like it was bubbling up from somewhere deep. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to check the tape again to prove to myself it was just my imagination. I wish I hadn't. The moment the tape started, I knew something was different. The opening was gone, no Nickelodeon splash screen, no cheerful music. Instead, the episode began mid-scene with SpongeBob standing in the ruined street, staring directly into the camera. His smile was wider than before, his eyes darker. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The background. It wasn't Bikini Bottom anymore. It was my street, my building. I checked the tape again. The scene had changed. I should have stopped right there, but instead, I felt that same pull I'd felt the first time. That gnawing need to know what came next, even if I hated myself for it. I told myself I was only going to watch long enough to confirm what I'd seen before, that somehow the background had shifted into my street. But the moment the tape began, I knew this wasn't just a repeat. The opening shot was my old elementary school. Not a cartoon version of it, my school, exactly as I remembered it. The chipped blue paint on the front doors, the crooked flagpole, even the faint graffiti carved into the brick near the entrance. The only difference was that it was underwater, swaying gently as if caught in a slow current. SpongeBob was there, standing in front of the doors. He was still drawn in that bright, exaggerated style, but the world around him was rendered with uncanny realism. The contrast made my stomach knot. He waved at me, not at the camera, at me, and then turned to walk inside. The hallways were lined with lockers, each one the exact shade of dull green the first remembered. As the camera followed him, I began to notice details that made my skin crawl. The names scrawled on the lockers were kids I'd gone to school with. Some I hadn't thought about in years. Some were dead. He stopped at one locker in particular, mine. The combination lock spun on its own, clicking open. Inside was a stack of drawings I'd made in second grade, the kind I used to hide because I thought they were embarrassing. But here they were, animated in SpongeBob's world, the crayon lines shifting and moving like they were alive. He pulled one out and held it up to the camera. It was a picture of me and my childhood dog, Max. I hadn't thought about Max in over a decade. He died when I was 12. In the drawing, Max was smiling. On the paper in SpongeBob's hands, Max's smile slowly widened, his eyes darkening until they were just black pits. I felt cold all over. The scene changed without warning. Now we were in my childhood bedroom. The posters on the wall, the mismatched furniture, even the dent in the closet door from when I'd thrown a baseball too hard, all of it was there. SpongeBob sat cross-legged on my bed, flipping through a photo album I knew I'd hidden in a box years ago. He stopped on a page I didn't recognize. The photo was of me, maybe 6 years old, sitting at the kitchen table. My face was pale, my eyes red from crying. In front of me was a birthday cake with only one candle lit. I had no memory of this. Then, as I watched, the photo moved. My younger self looked up from the cake and stared directly at me. His lips moved, but no sound came out. SpongeBob leaned in close to the photo as if listening and then turned back to the camera. He said something. It wasn't my name this time. It was a sentence, short, deliberate, and it was something I had never told anyone. Not my parents, not my friends. A secret I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. Hearing it in his voice made my vision swim. I hit pause, my hands shaking. The image froze on his face, that fixed smile now looking less like joy and more like possession. That was when I knew. This tape wasn't just showing me a corrupted episode. It was inside my memories, pulling pieces out and twisting them into something unrecognizable. I couldn't let it keep going. I had to destroy the tape. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that warped smile, those black pit eyes, and the way my own memories had bled into his world. By morning, I'd made up my mind the tape had to go. Before I did anything, I decided to try one last thing. Contact the seller. Maybe they'd tell me what this was, where it came from, how it was even possible. Maybe they'd laugh and admit it was some elaborate art project. I pulled up the auction site and opened our old message thread. My earlier questions still sat there unanswered. I typed fast, my fingers trembling. I don't know what you sent me, but I'm getting rid of it. This isn't funny. For a long time, nothing. I refreshed the page over and over, watching the empty last scene indicator. Then, just as I was about to close the tab, a new message appeared. Don't destroy it. That was all. 2 words. I fired back. Why? The reply came almost instantly, like they'd been waiting. If you destroy it, you'll finish what it started. My stomach turned. What started? I typed. This time, the pause was longer. When the next message came, it was worse than anything.
Ide imaginat.
You've already let him in. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. My first instinct was to demand answers, but before I could type, the chat window blinked. The seller's username was gone. Their profile had vanished completely, as if it had never existed. I sat there for a long time, the glow of the monitor painting the room in cold light. The words looped in my head, over and over. You've already let him in. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that the tape was still in my apartment, and every second it stayed here felt like a mistake. I unplugged the VCR, yanked the tape out, and held it in my hands. The plastic felt warmer than it should have, almost like it had been sitting in the sun. For a moment I thought I heard something faint inside. Not the rattle I'd noticed before, but a slow, deliberate tapping. That was it. I didn't care what the seller had said. I was going to end this, one way or another. I told myself this was it, the last time. I wasn't watching for curiosity anymore. I was watching to document it, to prove to myself and anyone else that I wasn't losing my mind. Set up my phone on a tripod in front of the TV, hit record, and slid the tape into the VCR. The screen lit up instantly. No splash screen, no opening credits. Just SpongeBob standing in the middle of that ruined street again. Only this time he wasn't smiling. His mouth hung slightly open, as if he'd just been interrupted mid-sentence. His eyes tracked me, not the camera me. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck. The camera in the episode began to move forward, closing the distance between us. Glanced at my phone screen to make sure it was capturing everything, but the live preview was wrong. It wasn't showing SpongeBob at all. It was showing me, sitting on the couch, staring at the TV. I froze. On screen, SpongeBob tilted his head, then stepped toward the lens. The perspective shifted. In a way that made no sense. It was as if he was stepping out of his world and into mine. The colors of the cartoon bled into the edges of my living room, bright yellows and blues, seeping into the walls like ink in water. The static hiss grew louder, layered with that wet, bubbling undertone. My phone screen flickered, the image of me on the couch warping, stretching, until my face was just a smear of color. SpongeBob's voice came through, low and deliberate. If you're watching this, it's already too late. I tried to stop the tape, but the remote didn't respond. The buttons on the VCR wouldn't. Press down as if they'd fused in place. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, like I was breathing through water. On screen, SpongeBob reached forward and his hand kept going, pushing past the boundaries of the TV frame. The colors around his arm shifted from flat animation to something textured, wet, and real. Drops of water hit the carpet in front of the TV. I stumbled back, but the couch was suddenly too far away, the room stretching like taffy. The static was deafening now, vibrating in my teeth. My phone clattered to the floor, still recording, the lens catching the moment his hand closed around my wrist. It was cold. Not the chill of air conditioning or ice, but the deep, crushing cold of the ocean floor. My skin prickled, my vision swam, and the edges of the room dissolved into swirls of cartoon color. I tried to scream, but the sound came out as a stream of bubbles. The last thing I saw before the static swallowed everything was my own reflection in his eyes, distorted, rippling, and smiling back at me. Then there was nothing but the hiss. The footage I recorded cuts off before the end. I know because I've replayed it or tried to, a dozen times. One moment, the frame shows me on the couch, leaning back as something unseen pulls me forward. The next, the image fractures into jagged lines of color, like the tape itself is tearing apart. Then comes the laugh. The SpongeBob's, but not the one anyone remembers. It's slowed to a crawl, each ha, warped and wet, echoing as if it's coming from the bottom of a deep well. The sound fills the room even when I mute the speakers. I can feel it in my chest, in my teeth. The video doesn't fade to black. Instead, it lingers on a single frozen frame, the same one I saw when this all began. His face stretched into that impossible grin, eyes too human, staring straight ahead. Only now the static around him ripples, and if you watch closely, you can see tiny bubbles drifting upward from the corners of his mouth. Somewhere beneath the hiss, there's another sound. Faint, almost lost in the noise. My voice, muffled, distorted, but unmistakably mine. Calling out, panicked, before fading into a long, gurgling silence. I didn't upload the file. At least, I don't remember doing it. But it's out there now. People have messaged me saying they've seen it, that it showed up in their recommended feed, without them searching for it. Some say the video freezes at different moments for them. Some say they've heard their own names in the static. If you find it, don't watch past 9 minutes. And if you do, well, you've already seen the frame you can't unsee.